The Sands of Time. A journey through Egypt's heart. The morning sun cast long shadows across the excavation site as Dr. Sarah Mitchell brushed the last grains of sand from the ancient papyrus fragment. The desert wind whispered through the valley, carrying with it the scent of antiquity and the promise of discovery. She had spent 3 years searching for this piece, the final fragment of what appeared to be a complete chronicle of Egyptian history, written by a scribe whose name had been lost to time. Sarah's weathered hands trembled slightly as she held the delicate paper up to the light. The hieroglyphs seemed to dance before her eyes, telling a story that spanned millennia. Her colleague, Dr. James Rodriguez, approached from across the dig site, his boots crunching softly on the sandy ground. "Is that it?" James asked, settling beside her on the low stone wall that bordered their work area. "The missing piece." Sarah nodded, unable to speak for a moment. She had dedicated her life to understanding ancient Egypt, but this discovery felt different, personal, somehow, as if the ancient scribe had written it specifically for her to find. The papyrus began with the earliest days, when the mighty Nile first carved its path through the desert, bringing life to a barren land. Sarah could almost see the first settlers, drawn by the river's promise, establishing small communities along its banks. The scribe wrote of how these early people learned to read the river's moods, to plant when it flooded and harvest when it receded. "Listen to this," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the desert breeze. She began to translate her words, flowing like the ancient river itself. "The first pharaohs emerged from these riverside settlements," the scribe explained, uniting the scattered tribes under one rule. King Nama, wearing the double crown that symbolized his dominion over both Upper and Lower Egypt, became the first to call himself pharaoh. The scribe described the ceremony with such vivid detail that Sarah could almost hear the ancient drums echoing across the centuries. As the old kingdom rose, so too did humanity's first great monuments. The scribe wrote of the pharaoh Djoser, who dreamed of a tomb that would reach toward the heavens. His architect, Imhotep, designed the first pyramid, not the smooth-sided monuments that would come later, but a stepped structure that climbed skyward like a great stone staircase. Sarah paused in her translation, looking out across the valley where the ruins of ancient Memphis lay buried beneath layers of sand and time. The scribe's words painted pictures of bustling cities, of markets filled with goods from across the known world, of priests chanting in temple halls lit by flickering oil lamps. The Great Pyramid of Khufu rose next. The scribe recorded, built by thousands of workers who labored for decades to create what would become one of the world's great wonders. But the papyrus revealed something unexpected. These were not slaves, as many believed, but paid workers who took pride in their craft. They were fed well, given medical care, and honored for their contribution to Pharaoh's eternal resting place. The human cost was enormous, Sarah murmured, her throat tight with emotion. But so was the human achievement. James leaned closer, fascinated by the unfolding narrative. The scribe continued his chronicle through the Middle Kingdom, when Egypt reunited after a period of civil war. He wrote of pharaohs who dug canals and built fortresses, who expanded trade routes and welcomed foreign peoples into Egypt's embrace. Then came the dark time, the Hyksos invasion, when foreign rulers seized control of the delta. The scribe's writing grew urgent here, describing the confusion and fear as traditional ways were disrupted. But from this chaos emerged some of Egypt's greatest leaders. Queen Hatshepsut, who ruled as pharaoh for 22 peaceful years, building magnificent temples and sending trading expeditions to distant lands. The most fascinating passage described Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh who abandoned Egypt's traditional gods to worship only the sun disk Aten. The scribe wrote with obvious disapproval of this religious revolution, but also with a grudging admiration for Akhenaten's courage in defying centuries of tradition. Sarah's voice caught as she read about Tutankhamun, the boy king who died so young, and then Ramesses the Great, whose 67-year reign saw Egypt reach the height of its power. The scribe described the pharaoh's many monuments, including the magnificent temple at Abu Simbel, carved directly into the living rock. But the papyrus also revealed the gradual decline that followed. Foreign invasions by sea peoples, whose identity remained mysterious, the slow weakening of pharaonic power as priests and nobles carved up the kingdom among themselves. The coming of Alexander the Great, whose conquest ended 3,000 years of native Egyptian rule. The Ptolemaic period brought new challenges. The scribe recorded Greek rulers who adopted Egyptian customs but never truly understood the people they governed. And finally, the last pharaoh, Cleopatra VII, brilliant and ambitious, who fought desperately to preserve Egypt's independence, but ultimately fell to Roman might. Sarah's hand shook as she reached the papyrus's conclusion. The scribe wrote of watching Roman legions march through Alexandria, of seeing the ancient temples converted to serve foreign gods. His final words were both heartbreaking and prophetic. The river flows eternal, but empires are like morning mist. They rise with the sun and vanish with the wind. The sun had moved significantly across the sky as Sarah finished reading. She sat in silence, overwhelmed by the weight of history contained in the fragile document. James placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "What's wrong?" he asked softly. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes, surprised to find herself crying. It's just ... all those lives, all those dreams and ambitions and fears. The scribe who wrote this lived through the Roman conquest. He watched his entire world disappear. She looked out across the dig site, where other team members continued their patient work of uncovering the past. But he was wrong about one thing, she continued, her voice growing stronger. Imperis the but the human spirit that endures. Every artifact we find, every inscription we translate, brings these people back to life. James nodded thoughtfully. What will you do with the papyrus? Sarah carefully wrapped the ancient document in protective cloth. Share it with the world. This scribe wanted his story told. That's why he wrote it all down. Despite the danger, he couldn't know that 3,500 years later, someone would find his words and understand his message. As evening approached, Sarah packed her equipment with unusual care. Tomorrow would bring new excavations, new discoveries, new pieces of the vast puzzle that was human history. But tonight, she would return to her tent carrying the complete story of one of humanity's greatest civilizations. The desert wind continued its eternal song as the sun set over the valley, painting the sand in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere beneath her feet lay more stories, waiting patiently for their turn to emerge into the light. The ancient scribe had been both right and wrong. Empires fade like morning mist, but the stories they leave behind can endure forever, connecting us across the vast expanse of time to our shared human heritage. In her tent that night, Sarah carefully photographed each section of the papyrus, ensuring that the scribe's chronicle would survive for future generations. His name might be lost, but his voice would echo through eternity, telling the world about the magnificent civilization that flourished beside the eternal Nile.